Hello and welcome to this video on one of the most common acts of malpractice in academia, plagiarism. The simplest definition of plagiarism is to use someone else's work, ideas, or information without giving them the acknowledgement that they deserve for providing that or making it available. There have been some impressive but stupid examples of this. In general terms, scientific writing is a process of gathering information, distilling it down to the core information, and then using it as a point from which to launch into your own research or findings. This comes in the form of citations. In good academic writing, a source is neither quoted nor copied piecemeal from the original work. It is instead paraphrased, reworded, or reworked into a new structure suited to the purpose of the work at hand. Compare these two sentences. The basic characteristics of the symbol is its innate power. A characteristic of the symbol is its innate power. One is the original, while the other was plagiarized by Dr. Martin King Luther Jr. Even the social icons of a time are not free of the stain of academic misconduct. One of these is from the original work, while the other is a plagiarized copy. We will provide more context to events like this later, but keep it in the back of your mind. There is a big difference between the concept of inspired, based on, and being a copy of. Students learn what academic misconduct is early in their degree. They are taught not to steal, misrepresent, or take the work of another. Sometimes this is simplified through the use of plagiarism detecting software, although these systems are never perfect and can in fact be easily manipulated and gamed. They still provide an opportunity to learn what could be plagiarism and how to minimize the risk, but they're a learning tool. They should never be relied on as a primary method. Years later, some students will become academics, and they then experience some sort of specific amnesia when it comes to these lessons. Let's take a look at an example of quoting and using prior work properly. The Mein Kampf article by the grievance studies scholars Plagiarism, Lindsay, and Bogosian. It is a perfect example of this. It takes the key points of Chapter 12, Volume 1 of Mein Kampf and uses them to push forward a socially progressive and just agenda. The original work is not produced in whole. There is some argument to be made that it was at least partially plagiarized, but that's an awkward argument, as it would be more accurate and perhaps appropriate to say it was instead distilled, critically reviewed, and then repostured to produce the background and foundation to the argument made. The original message, intent, and purpose was completely cut out and removed from it, and instead a new core message was included. If, and as was the case, it is read without knowledge of the source, you would not be able to pick its origin. A citation would nominally have solved this issue in normal usage. Without it, the origin and basis of the argument is lost or considered original. But in this case, the argument itself is original. Perhaps the delivery and context was not, but plagiarism is not the issue there. Now we can look at an example of plagiarism that has properly failed. An article we've mentioned before is ideal for this purpose. Father Rosica had to apologize recently because he plagiarized. This led to his resignation from the board of a Catholic college affiliated with the University of Toronto in 2019. He took sections from 6 distinct and different papers, cobbled them together like an awkward jigsaw, and then claimed the work as his own. There was no effort made to attribute the notions, ideas, and theories he was putting forward from other authors and give them due credit for what they had done. Instead, what he did made it seem like he had come up with these ideas himself. This has grossly misrepresented what was his creation and idea and what belongs to others. This thereby gives him all the credit while taking away from the work of others. This would not endear any academic to their peers, And at times, academia can be truly vicious. This is demonstrated by what happened afterwards. Academics went trawling through his past works and identified many other instances of plagiarism by Father Roscoe. Remember, someone who's spent years working on an article to get it accepted and published is not going to look kindly upon someone else stealing their work. And in this case, that vindictive streak and somewhat vicious streak came out. Now for the work of Dr. King. He published a dissertation called A Comparison of the Conceptions of God in the Thinking of Paul Tillich and Henry Nelson Wyman. It was a 343-page document, and in those pages there were a number of issues. Perhaps the first and most obvious was that many of the concepts, specific words, and titles occurred in a similar location, purpose, and context from a dissertation only 3 years older than his own. It came from someone who would effectively be a senior student or a fellow or colleague to Dr. King, Jack Boozer, a student who also operated under the same advisor. What is particularly concerning with this is that Dr. King's dissertation included references to Boozer's work in the bibliography, but only in 2 footnotes. Clearly, given the depth and breadth of what he had been borrowing and using from these other dissertations, his own work should have had more frequent citations. In fact, there are certain sections where he's effectively lifted entire sentences and passages from the works of Tillich himself, Boozer, and other authors, but has not given due credit. That's where those 2 quotes we mentioned earlier come into play. The 2 quotes could easily be paraphrased as follows, or in any other reworking of the quotes. To add only the basic in front of a quote is not taking away from the fact that you're quoting someone. So when Dr. King says the basic characteristics of the symbol is its innate power, does not deviate from the fact that somebody had already specifically stated in that context a characteristic of the symbol is its innate power. To have properly taken it and used it the way he did, he would had to have paraphrased it. Even simply putting it down as symbols have a power of their own, then adding the details of these powers or symbols would have taken away a lot of these problems. There still should have been a citation, but at least it would not have been grossly plagiarized. Dr. King's example is one thing, but that was both a different time and culture. Religious academics have their own weird cult of academic integrity. They borrow freely from each other in many ways, whether that's in academic writing, books, or speeches. It is a bizarre bent, largely unseen in STEM subjects. Well, most of the time. An example from recent academic drama is the retraction of a paper in Scientific Reports. It fundamentally ripped out the heart of a master's student's thesis and then submitted that to the journal. The authors submitted it as their own original work. Fortunately, it was found and retracted, but that is still a low blow. To literally take a research student's work, which was published and indexed on a number of different sites, and represent it as your own. There are also even more nefarious cases. One example in particular stands out due to what it was and how it occurred. A pair of researchers from India have a known history of stealing papers that they have been able to see before they were published, denying them publication, but then taking the content of that research, effectively making it their own, and then resubmitting it for publication. That process is completely wrong. It undermines the entire process of peer review and defeats the purpose, and it is the epitome of plagiarism. In a way, plagiarism is very much like the tagline of a movie that says, inspired by or based on true events. One indicates a strict and dedicated adherence to the source material. The other takes considerable liberties for the purposes of the show or cinematic improvement. Those artistic flares are what deviate. One does give you an accurate representation of what happened, when, why, and how. In the case of academia, that would be clearly indicating where the idea came from and in what context. In the other, you have creativity taken for the sake of making something more artistic, more desirable, more likable, but it doesn't necessarily accurately represent the source content. This is the most common form of academic misconduct, and the reason for papers to be retracted or corrected. In some cases, plagiarism is inadvertent, whether that's because the citations were incorrect, the citation from the material that was being quoted or sourced was incorrect, and more. These minor mistakes can be corrected through an errata, which journals are often willing to work with. More severe cases, like some of those that we have mentioned, deserve to be retracted for what they are and how they've behaved. Thank you for watching this video. If you have found the content interesting, consider liking, sharing, and subscribing. Please post any comments, questions, or suggestions below.